on major changes to projects. We thought it was going to be useful to have this session on just explaining a bit about the policy, the procedures, you know, the bits that we're asking you to do if you're thinking about proposing a major change to projects. And what I need to say in terms of housekeeping is that we will be recording this session and we will be sharing with everybody on the website, so other students who might want to look at, you know, the policy, they can have access to it. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop me, ask the question, or use the chat function. Both Abby and myself, we will be monitoring the chat function to ask your questions, and depending on whether it's a question I can address at that point, I will be doing that. And hopefully with your questions, we might be able to generate frequently asked questions document as well, which will complement the policy. So in terms of the outline for the session, I'll just want to give you a bit about the context and the background, tell you about the criteria for assessing the proposed change, you know, the application information, what we expect you to provide in terms of information, and the process, and then what is the supervisor's engagement in that whole process. So it's a relatively straightforward outline. I don't expect to take a long period of time. I prefer to have the remaining of the session for questions and answers, perhaps, or even discuss individual circumstances if you feel that this is appropriate in this setting. Right. In terms of the context and background, we are bounded by ESRC guidelines and ESRC rules. And for all students that receive funding from SENS, it is a condition that if there are any significant changes, both to the title or to the focus of the student's research, those need to be approved in advance by SENS before you embark on the process of implementing those changes. And obviously, ESRC, and this is the general policy of the ESRC, without taking into consideration, of course, you know, the radical events that have taken place over the last 14 months. The guidelines state that only in the most exceptional circumstances, radical changes of topics or directions can be approved. Now, there is a slight difference here for the +3s and the 1+3s. So for students that are still on the master's year of the 1+3 award, there is no need for a substantial approval, or they don't kind of fall within this category of ESRC. It's only once you have commenced the +3 phase of a 1+3 studency. Obviously, you would need to notify us for this change, but it's a less, ESRC it's a bit more relaxed about those that are still in the master's years and they're thinking about making those changes. Obviously, as I said, in terms of the context background, COVID-19, the pandemic has created a lot of issues. We have been on 2 lockdowns so far. We have seen school closures. We have seen restrictions both in national and international travel. We have seen social distancing in place. We have seen a radical change to the way sometimes we collect data. We have seen changes to the way we access the resources from our universities. We have even seen sometimes changing the ability to access supervisor support. So what we want to make sure here is to give you a good understanding of what would be the process if you're thinking about making or proposing a major change to the PhD, because effectively you feel that the impact of COVID-19 is such that it would justify a major change. There are 2 key criteria for us to assess the proposed changes. And in reality, I can summarize it in the following way. Imagine you were changing your project in a way that it's a very different project from the original one. The key question we ask ourselves is whether this new proposed project would be of the same quality as the original one. So if we were able to put this project back into the student-led competition and take it through the different stages, you know, the institutional review stage, the pathway review stage, and the management review stage, would that project will still be fundable? Would that project, you know, attract the same scores, similar scores in terms of its quality? And that's the underlying principle. We want to make sure that whatever you're proposing is not actually compromising the quality. The other kind of important second criterion is that the new project and the proposal should fall within the same disciplinary boundaries as the original proposal. So you should be remaining within the same pathway. You shouldn't be changing because you're changing project. You shouldn't be changing, you know, going from, for example, human geography to social anthropology, or from psychology to business and management. So this is something that you shouldn't be doing, because effectively we want to then also make sure that there is parity across the different proposals within the same pathway. So quality is one thing. Disciplinary boundaries is a second kind of key criterion. And obviously, I appreciate here that quality is not something that can be judged easily, because what we do is we don't have a specific benchmark. We're not judging you against other proposals or anything like that. But what we're trying to do there is we have a procedure that we follow that gives us, you know, a number of opinions as to whether, you know, the quality of the new project is equivalent to the quality of the original project. In order to do this change or to propose this change, there is an application, and we require a number of things on that application. There are two major things that we ask you to submit. The first one is an abstract of the proposed new project. So, you know, what this project is all about, what is the underlying literature, what is the methodological approach you will be following. And of course, again, talk about, as you were talking in your original proposal, about the contribution this project will make to the knowledge out there. In the second part of the application, we ask you to tell us and focus on the major changes. And that second part of the application has a number of questions that you need to be considering when you're putting the information forward. The first one is an obvious one. You know, what has necessitated the topic change? So why you're changing your topic, you know, midway through your PhD or at the end of your PhD. I imagine that given the current context and background, a lot of people will actually argue on the impact of COVID on the proposals, on the projects, on the data collection. And then there are a number of questions around the differences between the new project to the original one. So for example, is the original literature review still valid? Do you need to rework the original review? You might have done already a substantial amount of your literature review. If you're in your second year, you know, the expectation is usually that the literature review is conducted, the bulk of the literature review in the first year. So does it need to be partly reworked? Then the second question is around conceptualization and theoretical underpinnings. Again, do the originals still stand? Do they need to be partly reworked, or do they need to be completely reworked? So in all cases, you've got three kind of levels of change. No change, which might be that the original literature is still there, the original conceptualization is still there, partial change or a complete change. And we want you to tell us effectively in which of those three categories the different aspects of the PhD fall into. Equally, with the original methodology, still stand, does it need to be partly worked or completely worked? It doesn't have to be that you answer, that all these aspects of your PhD are be completely reworked. There might be that you're simply changing your methodology. There might be that you're simply changing your data collection process. And in that sense, the original literature is still there, or it requires a slight change. The conceptualization is still there, but the sample you're using, the access of data, the data collection, and perhaps data analysis might be completely different. So effectively, we're asking you about literature, concepts, and methodological approach, and we ask you to give us an evaluation of whether they are the same, slightly different, or completely different. The next bit is around the timeline. So you have a proposed timeline for your original project. We want you to effectively, overlap that with the new timeline and tell us whether you would need more time, whether you would need to shift activities in different ways. And of course tell us also whether with this new timeline, you would expect to request an additional funded extension. So far, we had an extension scheme for the final year students. We had what we call the phase 1, which was a call that went out to those students that were in the second year and third year in the autumn term. We had phase 2 of COVID-19 extensions funding, which was managed by the institutions. And we have now received information from ESRC that there will be also a phase 3 of extensions for COVID-19, which will be passed back to the doctoral training partnership. So SENS will be responsible for that. And we will be effectively following exactly the same procedure we did follow for phase 1, the one that we had responsibility. The call for that extension will come out soon. We're just finalizing the details. So you need to tell us whether you expect to apply for an extension and for how long that extension might be. Ideally, the original and the new timeline should be presented in the form of a Gantt chart, because that gives us a good justification of the extension request you might be putting forward. So in reality, the information we ask you to provide us is a new abstract for the new project, a comparison between the old project and the new project, and an evaluation of whether, on the basis of the literature, on the basis of the conceptualization, and on the basis of the methodological approach, there has to be a completely new approach, a partially new approach, or the existing literature review or conceptualization methodological part is fine. And then the second part of that information is around the new timeline, a comparison between the new timeline and the old timeline, and of course, the link between the new timeline and any potential extensions that you might want to ask. So this is the information we ask you. There is an application form together with the policy that allows you to put all that information. The questions that I have there reappear on that application form, so you can think about those questions as you're putting together the evidence. Now, there is a process that we follow for evaluating that. And although there is always, there is a formal process, I would start by saying that our SENS core team, Abby, myself, Felicity, we would encourage an informal discussion between yourselves and us before you initiate this process. And the informal discussion aims at minimizing the amount of paperwork, because at that point we can give you, and usually the discussion ends up with me, so you might have a preliminary discussion with Abby or Felicity, but usually I get involved at some point. A discussion whether you actually need to go through this process, or whether you're not talking about a major change, but it's more what we would call a minor change. So for example, if someone was saying, look, in my methodological approach, my data collection will take place in schools by having, you know, face-to-face interviews with school teachers and school heads. And your change is basically, well, I'm going to move that online and I'm going to conduct interviews online. That, of course, does not constitute a major change. You know, you're collecting data from the same sample, you're collecting data, you know, you're collecting the same data, you're changing the medium of the collection. So there is no point of asking you to go through this process, because effectively it's not a major change. And there is no discussion there about whether we need to evaluate the quality of the new project. Equally, there have been cases in the past where some students, for example, decided to move their fieldwork from one location to another because it was easier for them to access participants. Upon discussing those things, you know, we advised that this was not a major change. So we would encourage you to, and I've got our contact details on the next slide, we would encourage you to have that informal discussion, as I said, either with Felicity, Abby, or myself, and so we can provide you with some guidance in terms of what is important, what you need to be putting into the application, and whether you actually need to put that application together. We appreciate that you're all very busy. We're all very busy. You know, a 5-10 minutes discussion over Zoom might actually be more meaningful than a long exchange of emails and then asking you to complete a form, which it comes back to us and we say, well, there was no need for completing that form. After that initial informal discussion and getting our feedback and our comments, the first person that you need to be talking to is your supervisor. The supervisor at the end of the day will have to support the application for a major change, and they will have to provide their evaluation as well with regards to the changes you're suggesting. So you go to your supervisor and then you initiate the process, you draft the application, you forward to the supervisor, and the supervisor adds their supporting statement. The questions we ask the supervisor are very similar to the questions we ask you. So we ask the supervisor to give us an evaluation as to whether there are major changes to the literature, major changes to the conceptualization, major changes to the methodological part, and give us confirmation that the timeline you have put together there for the new project is actually a reasonable timeline and it's not overly optimistic. Once that is done and the supervisor has added the statement, the email goes to Abby, which is the SENS training manager, and she does a skim read of the application. The process effectively has an additional step here that it's to our discretion to use it. So the process here says that the application goes to the relevant pathway chair for comments or approval. Now, if this is a step that in some cases we have drawn upon, especially in cases where we are unsure about the disciplinary boundaries of the application, or where in cases, I was unable to assess the quality of the new proposal because of the technicalities there. And what we do is we send it to the pathway chair. The pathway chair looks at that, provides a commentary, and gives us a go-ahead. And then the form comes to me for my final approval. And obviously, from that point onward, is more about an administrative bureaucratic procedure where we let you know that this is the decision. We let the academic and administrative lead of your home institution know that this change has been made. And of course, what we do is we use the abstract you have sent us to update the information on the SENS website next to your profile. I said that I have our contact details. So as I said, for those informal discussions, you probably know those things already, but I thought it was useful to have them on the presentation as well. So either myself, Abby, or Felicity, the three individuals that would be more than happy to have those discussions with you. I want to draw a close here and perhaps leave the remaining of the time for questions. And as I said, you could do it either coming on mic or through the chat function. Sophie.
Hello, hi. I've just got a very quick question, just in terms of the area that I'm doing my research in is very fast developing, so it's changing. I presume, you know, if I just take that into account and I'm updating and I'm slightly shifting to take into account new developments, that is not a substantial change.
No, that's not a substantial change. If there is a drift in the area that you are discussing anyway, in terms of the literature, you know, new things, no, that wouldn't constitute a major change.
Thank you.
There is always a very fine balance what is an incremental change and what is a major change. One of the things I would say here is, if you were to ask, if you remember, there are three areas: the literature, the conceptualization, and the methodology. And there are also three kind of three stages, you know, no change, partial change, or significant change. If you were to say partial change in at least two of them and significant change in at least one of them, for me, that would be almost a definition of a major change to the project, where you would need to be changing almost everything. That being said, if there is a major change to at least one, it's something where we would need to have an informal discussion with you and see, you know, how major that change is.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's a very fast moving area of law, so it's just keeping up with it all, really. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Fragkiskos, I think William's got his hand up. And
yes.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I'm in my master's year at the moment, and I trialed the method that I put into my original abstract for my PhD. But in hindsight, I've kind of realized that maybe it's not the most appropriate method to actually go forward using. My other one was very specific to like observational research in the context of public space characteristics. But now I kind of want a more general observational methodology. And I was kind of wondering, I don't think it's like a massive substantial change because the question and focus is the same. But I've looked at my profile on the SENS website, and I just don't think that accurately represents the research I will be doing next year. So I'm wondering, so I don't think it's a massive change, but I want it to reflect still what I'm doing.
William, that would be a useful thing to do. So you could send us what would reflect your new profile, and on that we can have that. I can have a read of that, a read of the original one, which is usually what I tend to do at this stage. And then I can tell to Paul, you know, we can go ahead and basically update the profile. This is not a major change. or I can then come back to you and say, look, we need to have a more detailed discussion.
Yeah.
I need to understand X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But if you send us that, you know, small abstract as we collect, and you're saying this is what I would be doing instead of what you have on the website, we basically hit 2 targets with this.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Siobhan. I think Siobhan had a hand up. Siobhan, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Yes? We can hear you, but you can't hear us. So Siobhan asks, I wanted to know whether there was a need to apply for if the only change is the timeline of the fieldwork. No, that doesn't constitute a major change. So this is dealt separately with the extension. So we would expect you to apply for an extension there, and you know, in that extension you need to talk about the timeline. But effectively, your literature doesn't change, your conceptualization doesn't change. If you're simply changing the shift, you know, the timing of the fieldwork, no, there is no need for a major change application here. We would only look at major changes if there are changes to the actual fieldwork. Any other questions? Either on mic or through the chat function. Right, I take it there are no other questions. So what I can do is we can draw the session to a close here. Will the slides we share? Yes, we will be sharing the slides. Sophia, I think I will be sending an updated version to Abby, and she can send them out to you. What I want to say is, I think my concluding message here, because each one of us might have, you know, individual projects with individual needs in terms of the changes. If in doubt, ask. And this is why we said the best part of the process, or the most important part of the process, is actually having that informal chat with us, sending us, you know, very similar to what William said, sending us perhaps an abstract where we can look at that abstract and say, give you a preliminary evaluation assessment of the changes and what is actually happening. We're here to support you in this process as we have done so far, and we want to minimize kind of the amount of work it's required for you to complete your studies. So thank you very much, everyone.